Spider-Man Far From Home is the 23rd film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, as well as the final one of both 2019 and Phase 3, with there not being any more Marvel movies this year and for a very long time, like 8 months or something. I thought this would be a good time to rank all of the movies in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I will give them scores, which might vary from previous scores I've given them in the past. That's just because I basically give them new scores every single time I do a ranking like this, just to fit in with the actual ranking, and also I will give short reviews for these actual movies. Now, keep in mind, there are spoilers for every single movie in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but since it just came out, specifically Spider-Man Far From Home, so if you haven't seen that movie yet, you could skip the part where I talk about Spider-Man Far From Home, or just go watch the movie before watching this video. Anyway, with that in mind, let's start this video and this list with number 23. The Incredible Hulk is a fairly boring and honestly mostly filler movie for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. If you want to do a binge watch or a marathon of the MCU, you can skip this movie and it will have no consequences on the enjoyment. Actually, it'll make it more enjoyable and make the whole marathon go faster, and you just will skip a pretty boring movie. The characters in this movie, outside of Bruce Banner and I guess General Ross, the rest of them are pretty damn annoying, especially the main love interest, Betty Ross. I think she's one of the worst characters in the MCU, and while the Abomination is a pretty good villain, and the action is definitely not bad, especially for the time, The Incredible Hulk fails to live up to the standard of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and is largely considered to be the worst movie in the franchise.
I'll find a way to save us all.
Unlike The Incredible Hulk, Thor: The Dark World is definitely not a movie you should skip if you're watching the entirety of the Infinity Saga or the Marvel Cinematic Universe, as it is fairly important. It introduces the Reality Stone, and it is revisited in Avengers Endgame, which is kind of a shame because it's not an easy watch. Not that it's revisited, that's not a shame. It's a shame that it's so important because it's definitely not a movie that's easy to watch compared to the rest of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The movie has a very generic plot and a god-awful villain, as well as extremely boring visuals. The movie is kind of funny at times, but there is really absolutely nothing else to this movie that makes it interesting outside of its overall importance to the Infinity Saga. Iron Man 2 suffers from basically just being a setup movie without really much concern for its own product. The villain is probably the worst one in the whole franchise, and that's Whiplash, and while there are certainly good moments of action and comedy, there isn't really much else more in Iron Man 2. Robert Downey Jr. is still great in the role of Tony Stark, and I do also like War Machine in this movie, but there is just really not enough in this movie to feel like its own product. Again, it's mostly setup, which the Marvel Cinematic Universe, especially Phase 1, definitely did benefit from that setup, but the actual movie Iron Man 2 definitely doesn't.
You gave her wings?
And blasters.
So I take it you didn't have that tech available for me?
No, I did.
Coming right after Infinity War, Ant-Man and the Wasp, I think, was awkwardly placed in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I feel like it should have came out before Infinity War, with the end credit scene of this movie being one of the end credit scenes of Infinity War, because it's so awkward. After you watch Infinity War in like a marathon or in the placement of when it came out release date wise, it's so weird because you're dying to find out what happens after the snap, or maybe even during the snap, which doesn't happen at all until the end credit scene, which is why the end credit scene is by far the best part of this movie. So I think the placement of this movie in the timeline, or again, not really the timeline, but the release date, it was weird, but also this movie kind of looks cheap. It's funny, but not as funny as the original Ant-Man. The villain isn't great, and there isn't really a clear villain at all, and the movie just doesn't look very good at all, making this in my opinion, fairly disappointing sequel, as well as a pretty weird follow-up to Avengers Infinity War.
I'm not what you think I am.
The movies in between Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame were definitely not the highlight of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Both Ant-Man and the Wasp and Captain Marvel, I would say, are mostly just okay, and definitely not as good as most movies in this franchise. Captain Marvel has a pretty bland main actress, and also a bland, boring, generic visual style that looks very similar to Star Wars, basically right up until the end. I do think that the ending is cool when she unlocks her powers. That, I think, visually looks pretty great, which is why I'm not adverse to a sequel where we see the entire movie with that visual style, but up until then, it's a pretty boring movie with a pretty boring main actress and a pretty boring visual style, which is why Captain Marvel just didn't really do anything for me, and it is definitely not as good as most movies in this franchise.
I will return.
I think Thor has a pretty great introduction to the titular character Thor, as although he's not at his peak in the Marvel Cinematic Universe and nowhere near, I think really liked his arc in this movie, and the main villain, Loki, is a pretty great main villain, honestly one of the best main villains in the entirety of the franchise. The problem here is really two big things. One, the annoying and the pointless side characters, Jane Foster, Darcy, and Eric Selvig. They're not interesting enough to take up the amount of screen time that they do, which is acknowledged by later movies, and honestly they're kind of annoying. Also, the setting of this movie, the New Mexico setting, it's like one of the most boring places on Earth, one of the most boring looking places on Earth, which didn't help this movie at all, and I think Thor could have been a lot better, especially when you consider that both Thor and Loki were great characters, and they basically held up this movie, which is why I definitely still like this movie.
No politics here. Just good old-fashioned revenge.
An otherwise very fun movie with a cool and pretty unique visual style with a lot of heart in it. I think I actually really liked Iron Man 3. It's very enjoyable. I liked it in general, and I also liked the villain quite a lot. That is until the twist. The Mandarin twist is one of the most infamous moments in the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe, and for a good reason. I think it was really stupid. Not that I really care about the Mandarin himself. I never really was a huge Iron Man fan. I never really knew about the Mandarin, but I think that this movie itself had a pretty great villain and a great menace, and for some reason also a great rivalry with Iron Man in the actual movie, but then they just threw that away for a pretty generic villain who just wasn't as good. The rest of the movie after that twist felt like a movie that is not as good as the movie that came before the twist, which really made this movie a lot worse than it could have been. I still enjoyed it, and I liked the first 2/3, but after the twist, the movie kind of fell apart.
The revolution will be live.
Black Panther is actually the highest rated movie out of all the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies on Rotten Tomatoes, which I just don't get. I really don't think it's that good. I think that although the main villain, Killmonger, is one of the best in the MCU, and the setting of Wakanda is pretty damn cool, other than that, it's just not that great. The terrible CGI in this movie is kind of unforgivable, as it came out in 2018. The CGI is just, for a movie with this big a budget, it has no excuse for looking that bad, and it ruined a big portion of the action in this movie. The final fight between Killmonger and Black Panther is god-awful. Black Panther himself is just not as cool or badass as he was in Civil War, and I think Black Panther is just a relatively average movie for the MCU. Still good, but definitely not as great as the critics said.
There are no strings on me.
Avengers Age of Ultron is the black sheep of the Avengers quadrilogy, as it's the only one that isn't considered to be a great movie, and I definitely agree. I think that it has a way too big over-reliance on comedy. Ultron is ruined a little bit by the fact that he's just not serious enough. It really took away from the enjoyment of the character. I still really like him as a villain. He looks really cool, and I like his motivation, and he's definitely pretty comic accurate, but he just joked way too much, and he quipped way too much. The movie is also filled with dumb stuff like Quicksilver's death, Thor Thor's exposition pool, a lot of dumb writing, character development, and relationships, specifically Black Widow and Hulk, came out of nowhere. It was really stupid. So I think that while I really enjoyed Age of Ultron, it is bogged down by a lot of really, really dumb moments. But still, though, it is fairly entertaining, and I think it's just not as good as the rest of the Avengers movies, but still not bad either.
That's a really bad sign.
Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 is 100% a worthy sequel to the original, with hilarious comedy, a great team dynamic, great visuals, as well as one of the best villains in the MCU in Ego. That being said, Volume 2 is kind of inarguably less memorable than Volume 1, and certainly isn't as strong, in some regards at least, but is still great nonetheless, and I think the main villain, Ego, which is the big thing that they improve on in the original, is definitely one of the highlights of this movie as well.
I can do this. This is why you've been chosen.
Captain America the First Avenger perfectly tells Cap's origin story with one of the only compelling love stories in the entire franchise, with also a great villain in the Red Skull. It's certainly the worst of the Captain America trilogy, but that's not really saying much in terms of negativity, because it is a pretty awesome trilogy, and I think this movie is fairly underrated as a whole, as it is, I think, a great movie and a great introduction to Captain America.
What were you the god of again?
Thor Ragnarok reinvented Thor in the best way possible, making him a much more compelling and enjoyable character and way more badass. Ragnarok has great visuals, especially when you compare it to the other two movies in their trilogy. Thor is a really boring looking movie. Thor the Dark World looks pretty bad, but Thor Ragnarok looks pretty awesome, and it goes without the saying that this is an hilarious movie, which I think it's kind of to a fault, as the over-reliance on comedy doesn't allow for much emotion in a story where the main hero loses his father, his weapon who he has an emotional attachment to, as well as his home, which that's my main problem with the movie. Other than that, however, I think it is a lot of fun, and certainly by far the best Thor movie we've gotten so far.
I know. Wasn't my idea.
AntMan, I think, is a fairly underrated movie in the MCU. I think that it is, in my opinion, the funniest movie in the MCU, and it's just so hilarious. The movie also has great visuals in its use of the shrinking effect, and while Yellowjacket is certainly not the best villain in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and nowhere near, I think that his design makes up for it just a little bit because it looks so cool, and it makes the fight scenes look so much better. AntMan, I think, is a movie that I really, really enjoy, a lot more than the sequel, and it is, in my opinion, the funniest movie in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, a great introduction to the character of Scott Lang, aka Ant-Man, and one of my favorite movies in the MCU overall, which is insane because it is at number 11. The MCU is just a great franchise with a lot of great movies.
Looking for you.
Doctor Strange has an incredible and very unique visual style, with a pretty compelling main character and a very clever ending in the way Strange defeated Dormammu. The main villain, Malekith, or at least the other main villain, is not very good, and the love story in the background feels kind of out of place, but I think Doctor Strange looks incredible. It's a great origin story for Doctor Strange, and it's a great introduction to him as well in a pretty awesome movie. Guardians of the Galaxy is a very fun and heartfelt as well as funny movie with compelling characters, great visuals, as well as action, and kind of did something insane by making these characters a very, very obscure Marvel group in the Guardians of the Galaxy. Not only household names, but also fan favorites, and I think that it definitely deserves its recognition, which it gets the recognition for that, and it definitely deserves to be pretty high on the list just for that. It's got some great emotional scenes, and it is definitely one of the most memorable movies in the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
I'm just not the hero type, clearly.
Iron Man did an incredible job at kickstarting the Marvel Cinematic Universe with the introduction of Tony Stark, aka Iron Man, and his origin story. Tony has a great character arc in a movie with great action and a lot of funny moments that successfully made Iron Man a household name, very similar to the last movie that I covered. I recently rewatched Iron Man and it was so much better than I remembered, so I bumped it up a couple slots on the list compared to my last list because I think that it definitely deserves to be at this high a place on the list.
Because I will kill you and everybody you love.
Spider-Man is my favorite superhero of all time, and Tom Holland's portrayal is certainly, in my opinion, the quintessential live-action portrayal at this point. Homecoming is hilarious, has a lot of great action and intense moments, and it just really gets the character of Peter Parker, aka Spider-Man. I think that visually it looks pretty great, and the main villain, Adrian Toomes, aka the Vulture, was at one point, when the movie came out, my favorite main villain in the entirety of the MCU. He has been dethroned, obviously, by Thanos, but also a couple of the villains are a little bit better, but still, I think that Vulture is an incredible villain for Spider-Man Homecoming.
The world needs the next Iron Man.
Are you going to step up or not?
Spider-Man Homecoming was at one point my favorite live-action Spider-Man movie, but that also has been dethroned, just like the Vulture's top spot in the main villains list, by Spider-Man Far From Home. Tom Holland is still perfect as Peter and Spider-Man, and just like in Homecoming, these movies really understand the character. This movie, I think, just looks outstanding in the visuals. It is honestly, I think, the best-looking movie in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I mean, just the swinging scenes, the fight scenes, Spider-Man's new suit, and especially the insane jaw-dropping illusion scenes are all incredible in this movie. The villain, Quentin Beck, aka Mysterio, is one of the best in the entirety of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, making this the best live-action Spider-Man movie to date.
Taking your orders now, Captain.
Damn right.
Starting off the top 5, we have Captain America the Winter Soldier, which reinvented Cap for a more modern time, just like Thor Ragnarok reinvented Thor, and I think just like Ragnarok, it did it in the perfect way, making him a lot more badass, way more relatable, and overall, a lot more compelling. This movie also has great villains in both the Winter Soldier, also known as Bucky Barnes, as well as Alexander Pierce. A very intriguing and well-executed political thriller plot goes a pretty long way for one of the best and most exciting movies in the Marvel Cinematic Universe that made Captain America the fan favorite that he became right after, or just starting with this movie.
You can be damn sure we'll avenge it.
The Avengers did something impossible that no other movie outside of obviously the Marvel Cinematic Universe has been able to do, bringing together a bunch of different franchises successfully with a very, very fun, action-packed, heartfelt, pretty clever movie that assured that the Marvel Cinematic Universe would be sticking around for a very, very long time. The team dynamic in this movie is incredible, and it really cemented the Avengers as an incredible team that is just so enjoyable to watch. Loki is a great, great villain. The movie is just so much fun, making the Avengers one of the best movies in the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Final warning.
I could do this all day.
Captain America Civil War continues the political thriller aspect of the Winter Soldier and improves on it, this time involving the rest of the Avengers. This movie introduces both Spider-Man and Black Panther, which was awesome, but somehow the introduction of Spider-Man into the MCU was overshadowed by the gripping storytelling, the incredible action, and the emotional, kind of intense conflict between Captain America and Iron Man, or just between the entirety of the Avengers, which is all set in motion by one of the better villains in the MCU, Helmut Zemo. This movie perfectly capped off one of the best movie trilogies of all time in Captain America, which just got better every single time with every release, making Captain America Civil War, in my opinion, an incredible movie. Avengers Infinity War is made by its villain, which is Thanos. Thanos is inarguably the best villain in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and especially in Infinity War, but also one of the best villains in movie history, as the development and motivation for this character and the fact that he won in the end, it was insane for Infinity War. This movie is hilarious, action-packed with some great moments. It's incredibly emotional, especially the surprise ending with the snap, which shouldn't have been a surprise, but it was, bringing us probably the most, or maybe the second most emotional death in the entirety of the MCU, and the second most emotional scene, Spider-Man's death, and the snap as a whole. This movie is, again, hilarious, action-packed. It has a perfect balance between all of those things. Thor is really badass. Iron Man is really, really badass. This movie just doesn't really have many flaws, and the ones that are there, they're really, really easy to ignore, because Avengers Infinity War is an incredible movie.
Where did that bring you? Back to me.
As if Infinity War wasn't awesome enough, Avengers Endgame blew it out of the water, flawlessly concluding 11 years and 22 movies of storytelling that all led up to an insane and pretty incredible movie, complete with hilarious moments throughout, insane action, the perfect amount of fan service, as well as emotional and perfect endings to the main characters and payoff to the Marvel Cinematic Universe's Infinity Saga. Avengers Endgame is not only the best MCU movie in my opinion, not only the best superhero movie overall, but is currently my favorite movie ever made. The third act alone is incredible. Like, the entire time I was watching it in the theater, my jaw was on the floor. It was insane. The first two acts are pretty awesome as well, but the third act is really what makes this movie, and the ending of movies like the third act, I think, is the most important part. So it's good that I think this movie gets better with every act. The first act is great, the second act is awesome, and the third act is insane and incredible, making Avengers Endgame, in my opinion, the best movie in the Marvel Cinematic Universe so far. But considering I thought that also for Civil War, Infinity War, and now Endgame, I wouldn't be surprised, or maybe I would because the Infinity Saga ended, but I think the Marvel Cinematic Universe is here to stay, and I am so excited for the future of this franchise. So that is my ranking for all of the movies in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which is a movie that doesn't really need to be updated for a very long time. Let me know your ranking in the comments down below, as well as maybe like little short reviews for certain movies, especially Spider-Man Far From Home because it just came out, as well as the scores. If you like this video, make sure to leave a like, share, and subscribe, and maybe check out more videos on this channel. And as always, thanks for watching.